Have you ever noticed how quickly the mind jumps to conclusions? How effortlessly we categorize people, situations, even ourselves, into neat little boxes of good or bad, right or wrong. It happens almost automatically, a flash of judgment here, a quiet criticism there. It's like a constant background noise in our heads, whispering verdicts about everything and everyone. This judgmental mind is so familiar, so woven into the fabric of daily life, that we rarely stop to question it. But what if I told you this mental habit is one of the heaviest burdens we carry, heavier than any physical weight, heavier than most worries or fears? Imagine carrying a backpack full of stones, each stone representing a thought of disapproval, a harsh label, a critical glance, all piled up without end. It's exhausting. It drains our energy, clouds our joy, and dims our connection to the world around us. But this burden isn't just about feeling tired or stressed. A judgmental mind fractures our relationships, isolates us from others, and builds walls where bridges could be. It keeps us trapped in cycles of comparison and dissatisfaction, robbing us of peace. Living without this relentless inner critic sounds almost impossible, doesn't it? How could we navigate life without making any judgments? Wouldn't we lose our sense of discernment, our ability to make choices? Here's where ancient wisdom, particularly from Buddhist teachings, offers a profound insight. It invites us to explore a different way of relating to our thoughts, not by suppressing judgment entirely, but by seeing it clearly, understanding its roots, and learning to loosen its grip. This journey is not about perfection or denying our natural instincts. It's about freeing ourselves from a mind that constantly divides, separates, and condemns. It's about discovering the peace that arises when we greet each moment and each being with openness and kindness rather than quick judgment. So as we begin this exploration, I invite you to take a gentle breath, soften your gaze, and step into a space where judgment doesn't rule. Together, we'll uncover why this mental habit persists, what harm it causes, and how, with mindful practice, it can slowly dissolve, revealing a life rich in compassion and understanding. Because beyond the weight of judgment lies a freedom that transforms not just how we see the world, but how we live within it. If the first step toward freedom is recognizing the weight we carry, then understanding the nature of that weight, the judgmental mind, is the next crucial step. What exactly is this judgmental mind that seems to live in all of us? At its core, a judgmental mind is the habit of quickly evaluating and labeling everything we experience. It's like an uninvited commentator that instantly declares something or someone as good or bad, right or wrong, deserving or undeserving. This mental habit shapes how we see the world, but often it distorts the true nature of things. We don't always realize how automatic this process is. From the moment we wake up, our minds sift through countless impressions, sorting, comparing, and deciding. When someone cuts us off in traffic, the mind might leap to anger. That driver is reckless, selfish. When we fail at a task, we might think, I'm not good enough. When meeting new people, assumptions and biases rush in before we even know them. This judging is not merely an occasional act. It's a deeply ingrained pattern rooted in our survival instincts and conditioned by past experiences. Evolutionarily, quick judgments helped humans assess threats and make rapid decisions. But in our complex modern lives, this instinct often backfires, trapping us in cycles of misunderstanding and conflict. Buddhist teachings reveal that this tendency to judge springs from two main roots: ignorance and attachment. Ignorance, or avijja, means not seeing things clearly as they truly are. We mistake appearances for reality, fixate on superficial traits, and miss the bigger picture. Attachment, or upadana, means clinging to our preferences, beliefs, and identities. When things don't match our expectations, the judgmental mind kicks in to protect what we hold dear. But here's the catch. This mind of judgment doesn't just affect others. It's often turned inward with even greater force. We become our own harshest critics, constantly measuring ourselves against impossible standards. That inner dialogue can sound like, "I'm not enough," "I'm a failure," or "I should be different." This internal judgment feeds anxiety, shame, and self-doubt. The consequences ripple outward. When we judge others, we create distance. We label someone as different or less, and suddenly empathy and connection grow scarce. Social bonds fray, misunderstandings multiply, and compassion struggles to find a foothold. And yet, despite its pitfalls, the judgmental mind feels so natural that it's hard to imagine life without it. How do we recognize this habit within ourselves? How do we step back from the knee-jerk reactions and see judgment for what it truly is? A conditioned habit, not an absolute truth. The answer lies in mindfulness, the gentle awareness that watches these judgments arise without getting swept away. It's the practice of noticing when the mind labels, without immediately agreeing or reacting. This space between stimulus and response is where freedom begins. As we deepen this awareness, we begin to see that the judgmental mind, as pervasive as it feels, is not permanent. It's a pattern that can be understood, loosened, and gradually transformed. Next, we'll explore how Buddhist philosophy frames this judgmental tendency, not just as a mental quirk, but as a profound source of suffering, and how this understanding opens the door to a new way of living. We've seen how the judgmental mind shapes our everyday experience, dividing, labeling, and often distorting reality. But to truly grasp why this mental habit weighs so heavily on us, we need to turn to the profound insights of Buddhist teachings. Here, judgment isn't just a bad habit. It's understood as a fundamental source of suffering. At the heart of Buddhism lies the concept of dukkha, the deep dissatisfaction or suffering that colors much of human existence. It's not just about pain or hardship, but a pervasive sense that something is missing, something unsettled beneath the surface of life. And judgment, as it turns out, plays a pivotal role in feeding this dissatisfaction. Why? Because judgment creates separation. When we categorize the world into good and bad, pleasing and unpleasing, we set ourselves up for conflict. We cling to what we like, resist what we don't, and in doing so, we foster craving and aversion, two of the main roots of suffering in Buddhist thought. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from ignorance, avijja, not seeing the true nature of things. Judgment springs from this ignorance because it misperceives reality as fixed, permanent, and divided. We forget that everything is in constant flux, interconnected, and beyond simple labels. Moreover, judgment is deeply tied to attachment, upadana. When we judge, we hold tightly to ideas about how things should be. We become attached to our beliefs, identities, and views, resisting anything that challenges them. This clinging creates tension and pain, because the world rarely fits neatly into our expectations. Buddhism offers a map for how to unravel this cycle. The Noble Eightfold Path, the Buddha's guide to liberation, includes right view and right mindfulness, attitudes that encourage seeing things clearly and attentively without judgment. Right view helps us understand impermanence, suffering, and non-self. It dissolves the illusions that feed judgment. Right mindfulness trains us to observe our thoughts and feelings as they arise, without clinging or pushing them away. When practiced sincerely, these teachings cultivate a mind that can witness judgment without being dominated by it, a mind that responds with curiosity and compassion instead of condemnation. This shift is not just philosophical, it's practical and deeply transformative. It changes how we relate to ourselves and others. Instead of reacting with criticism or anger, we begin to respond with patience and kindness. Instead of seeing others as separate or flawed, we recognize the shared human experience of struggle and growth. Yet, this journey isn't about becoming perfect or never making distinctions. It's about loosening the grip of rigid judgments that imprison us and cause harm. It's about embracing uncertainty, complexity, and the fluid nature of life. Understanding the Buddhist foundation of judgment and suffering sets the stage for exploring its real-world consequences and how these mental patterns shape our relationships and personal well-being. Because the path to freedom doesn't stop with insight, it leads to healing and connection. And so, we move forward to see how judgment affects not just our inner world, but the world we live in, moment by moment. We've uncovered how judgment is deeply rooted in our minds, and why it's a core cause of suffering according to Buddhist wisdom. But what does that really look like in everyday life? How does this constant mental habit impact us, both inwardly and outwardly? Judgment is like an invisible toxin that slowly seeps into every corner of our lives. On the surface, it might seem harmless, a fleeting thought, a passing critique, but its effects run far deeper and wider than we often realize. First, judgment fractures our relationships. When we judge others, we place them on a scale of approval or rejection. We see differences instead of common ground, flaws instead of strengths. This builds walls where bridges could be, fueling misunderstanding, conflict, and isolation. Think about the last time you felt judged or judged someone else harshly. That tension, the tightening in the chest, the silence or harsh words that follow, all of these are signs of judgment's corrosive power. But judgment doesn't just damage our bonds with others. It also alienates us from ourselves. When the mind is steeped in self-criticism, perfectionism, and harsh standards, we become our own worst enemies. The constant barrage of not good enough thoughts erodes our confidence and joy, trapping us in cycles of shame and anxiety. This internal judgment can be so subtle that we don't even notice how deeply it influences our mood and behavior. It shapes our self-image and limits our potential because we start to believe the story our critical mind tells. Moreover, judgment blinds us to reality. When we're caught in judgment, we see only what fits our preconceived ideas. We miss the richness, complexity, and nuance of life. This narrowing of perspective makes us rigid and less adaptable, less able to respond with wisdom to changing circumstances. There's also a spiritual cost. In Buddhist terms, judgment reinforces ego, the false sense of a separate, fixed self that must defend itself. It feeds the illusion of I versus you, dividing the world into us and them. This division is the root of much suffering and disconnection. On a collective level, judgment breeds prejudice, discrimination, and social discord. When societies are quick to judge groups based on race, religion, gender, or ideology, the result is often division and violence. But here's the hopeful truth. Recognizing the harm judgment causes is the first step toward healing. By shining light on these patterns, we begin to see how we participate in them and how we might choose differently. The path forward invites us to cultivate awareness and compassion, first for ourselves, then for others. This doesn't mean ignoring wrongdoing or pretending everything is perfect. It means seeing clearly without condemnation, responding with kindness instead of harshness. As we deepen this understanding, the possibility arises for transformation, a life less weighed down by judgment and more open to connection, peace, and freedom. From this point, our journey will turn toward practical ways to begin releasing the grip of judgment and nurturing a mind that embraces openness and acceptance. So, how do we begin to loosen the grip of a judgmental mind that has shaped our view for so long? The answer lies not just in understanding, but in intentional practice. Small, steady steps that cultivate a mind of openness and kindness. Buddhism offers a rich toolkit for this transformation, starting with mindfulness. At its essence, mindfulness is the simple yet profound act of paying attention, on purpose, in the present moment without trying to change or judge what arises. Imagine you notice a judgment popping up, a thought labeling someone as difficult or yourself as inadequate. Instead of pushing it away or diving deeper into it, mindfulness invites you to pause and observe. You watch the judgment like a cloud drifting across the sky, there, but not permanent, not defining who you are. This gentle witnessing creates a crucial space between the stimulus and your reaction. It's within this space that freedom unfolds, the freedom to choose a different response, free from the automatic patterns of criticism or rejection. Another cornerstone practice is metta, or loving-kindness meditation. This is the deliberate cultivation of goodwill towards oneself and others. When judgment clouds our mind, it's often because compassion has been neglected. In metta practice, you begin by offering kind wishes to yourself. May I be happy. May I be free from suffering. Then you extend these wishes outward to a loved one, a neutral person, and even to those you find challenging. This practice softens the heart, opening it beyond the barriers built by judgment. The Buddha also taught the importance of equanimity, a balanced mind that remains steady amidst the ups and downs of life. Developing equanimity helps us hold judgments lightly, without being tossed around by likes and dislikes, praise or blame. Practicing equanimity means embracing life's impermanence and unpredictability with calm acceptance. It's not about apathy, but about a wise engagement that neither clings nor pushes away. Of course, cultivating a non-judgmental mind isn't about erasing discernment. Buddhism values wise discrimination, the ability to see clearly and make skillful choices. The key difference is approaching discernment without harshness or rigid labels. These practices require patience and persistence. The judgmental mind is deeply conditioned, shaped by years of habit. But with consistent effort, the mind can begin to shift, revealing a landscape of greater peace and clarity. And when we start to embody this non-judgmental awareness, the effects ripple outward, transforming how we relate to ourselves, to others, and to the world. From here, our journey leads us to explore the role of compassion, the heart's antidote to judgment, and how its cultivation deepens our freedom and connection. Sometimes, the deepest lessons come not from theory, but from stories, those living, breathing examples that reveal how the journey away from judgment can unfold in the messy, beautiful reality of life. Let me share a story about a woman named Maya. For years, Maya carried a heavy judgmental mindset, not just toward others but harshly toward herself. Every mistake felt like failure, every difference a reason for criticism. Her relationships suffered, and she often felt isolated and anxious. One day, after attending a mindfulness retreat, Maya learned to recognize her judgmental thoughts as passing clouds rather than absolute truths. She began practicing loving-kindness meditation, especially toward herself. Slowly, the voice of harsh criticism softened, replaced by gentle encouragement. Maya noticed something remarkable. As her self-judgment eased, her capacity to be patient and compassionate with others blossomed. Conflicts at work became opportunities for understanding rather than battles to win. She began to see people, including herself, with more humanity and less harshness. This transformation didn't happen overnight, it was a gradual unfolding. But it shows the power of consistent practice and self-awareness. Another example comes from a teacher named James, who struggled with judgment toward his students. He realized that his tendency to label certain behaviors as bad created barriers rather than bridges. Inspired by Buddhist teachings, he started to meet his students with curiosity instead of criticism. One day, a student who was often disruptive shared a painful story of loss and fear. James listened with openness and without judgment. This connection changed their relationship profoundly, opening space for healing and growth for both teacher and student. These stories illustrate a universal truth. Judgment builds walls, compassion and understanding build bridges. In everyday life, you might notice small moments where judgment arises. An impatient thought about a driver who cuts you off, a critical comment about a friend's choice, or self-doubt creeping in during a challenging task. These moments are invitations to pause and practice awareness. By bringing mindfulness and kindness to these small moments, we begin to reshape our habitual responses. Remember the Buddhist idea of interconnectedness, that our actions, thoughts, and intentions ripple through the web of life. When we reduce judgment in our minds, we contribute to a more compassionate world. These real-life examples aren't just inspiring stories. They are invitations to see your own life as a place where transformation is possible. As we prepare to close our journey, it's time to reflect on how embracing a non-judgmental mind changes everything, from the way we experience ourselves to the way we engage with the world around us. As we arrive at the close of this journey, it's worth pausing to truly absorb what it means to live without a judgmental mind. To embrace freedom beyond judgment is to step into a life unburdened by the heavy chains of criticism, both toward others and ourselves. This freedom is not a distant ideal, but a present possibility. It begins with simple awareness, a willingness to notice when judgment arises without running away or diving in. It grows with patience, kindness, and steady practice. Imagine what life would feel like if, instead of labeling every moment as good or bad, you met each experience with openness and curiosity. Imagine the peace that comes from releasing harsh inner critics and opening your heart to compassion. Living without judgment doesn't mean we lose our ability to see clearly. On the contrary, it sharpens our insight, allowing us to respond wisely rather than react out of habit. It deepens our connections, fosters healing, and nurtures a profound sense of belonging. This path is at the heart of Buddhist wisdom, a timeless invitation to awaken from the illusion of separateness and division. It calls us to embody a way of being where freedom, love, and understanding are not distant hopes, but lived realities. Thank you for walking this path with me, for exploring how we can free ourselves from judgment and open to the vastness of life. If this journey resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more deep, meaningful content to those seeking peace and wisdom in a busy world. And don't forget to leave a comment below. What was your biggest insight? How do you practice kindness toward yourself and others? Let's keep this conversation alive and grow together. Until next time, may your mind be clear, your heart be gentle, and your life be free.